Welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman, a podcast loaded with practical tips, powerful scripts, personal stories, and simple steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. So get ready to get the information you need to make the impact you want from someone you trust, your friend, parenting expert, Dr. Robyn Silverman.
Hello and welcome to How to Talk to Kids About Anything, where we give you the tips, scripts, stories, and steps to make even the toughest conversations easier. I'm so thrilled to be your host, Dr. Robyn Silverman, child and teen development specialist, author, and speaker, and most importantly, parent of two terrific kids who give me the opportunity to love, learn, and grow every single day, whether I want to or not. I get it. It's not always easy, but we are in this together, and thankfully, we have so many amazing guests who can help us understand how we can proceed and succeed. Now, every parent wants his or her child to be happy and successful. As parents, we learn from so many books and experts and our own parents that there's maybe some kind of formula in this, that if we have our kids get enough sleep, we feed them right, we send them to school, give them love, boundaries, make sure they do their homework, we put them in the right sports and get them involved with enrichment activities, that the brain and the body will develop and the child will be successful. The end. Of course, in practice, this isn't often so clear-cut. No child is the same as another, no brain is the same as another, and sometimes when children don't seem to be following the preconceived pattern that we expected, maybe we learned about, maybe we hoped for, we might wonder how our child, who is different from the norm, could be happy and successful. It turns out, as some of us have already discovered, that there is a power to being different. And as parents, we can help cultivate, inspire, and build upon that difference. And that's where the magic can happen. What magic, you might wonder? Well, that is the power of different. And that is why we are so privileged to make acquaintances with our awesome guest for today. Now, Dr. Gail Saltz is the best-selling author, magazine columnist, media commentator, and host of the Power of Different podcast. You've probably heard of her. She is an associate professor of psychiatry at New York Presbyterian Hospital Weill Cornell School of Medicine and a psychoanalyst with the New York Psychoanalytic Institute with a private practice in Manhattan. Her new book, which is awesome, The Power of Different, the link between disorder and genius, is available now. I've had the pleasure of being paired up with Dr. Gail Saltz on the Today Show for certain parenting segments. She's warm, insightful, and delightful. So let's put any distractions away if at all possible so we can learn about the power of different from the author herself, Dr. Gail Saltz. Thank you so much for joining us on How to Talk to Kids About Anything.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
We are thrilled to have you. Before we get into the meat of the matter, for those who haven't heard you speak or haven't read the book yet, maybe if you could just take a moment and tell us why you get up in the morning, why you're so interested in exploring and understanding and educating people about the power of different.
Well, my interest actually in this particular subject came out of several avenues. One is that I have been having a running series at New York City's 92nd Street Y, called Psychobiography, where I've looked at iconic genius people in history, in the arts and the sciences, in leadership, past presidents, in music, and I realized at a certain point that every time I tried to choose a subject that made a real difference in our world, in our history, and how we view things, inevitably they had a mental health issue or a learning disability. And I was really struck by that. Also, after years and years of practice, of 24 years at this point, I had many high-functioning patients who were wildly successful, actually, who were struggling with something, hence they came to see me. And I was really struck by the commingling of, something that was really a difficulty for them, and at the same time, some really astonishing strengths. And I've always been interested in the topic of genius, actually, in general, and sort of where does that come from? What is that about? Why are some people able to make use of their minds in this kind of way. I mean, that probably is harkened back to my youngest brother is an astrophysicist who won the Nobel Prize in 2011. Wow. So I grew up with genius, if you will. And so it's always just been a real fascination of mine.
Mm-hmm. So I guess then there is a link between disorder and genius, which is the subtitle of your book.
Clearly, there really is. If you look at the data, and I try to provide some really current studies that look at various aspects of brain wiring and its correlation to, and sometimes it's clear cause and effect to, very particular wiring that leads to strength. So we could be talking about, people who struggle. I tried to talk to the most common symptoms that kids and adults struggle with. So we could be talking about anxiety or mood issues. We could be talking about difficulty relating to others. Often, obviously I'm talking about the autism spectrum somewhat, but a very common issue is distractibility or difficulty paying attention. Again, often in kids, probably the most common issue that presents in school-age children, attention deficit disorder, and dyslexia and other learning disabilities.
So in your book, you refer to brain differences, and you were just talking about all these different symptoms and diagnoses. What does it really mean to have a brain difference? So
I kind of coined this term, and the reason I did this is that, people tend to hear about diagnoses. That is the DSM-5. That is the diagnostic manual that psychiatrists and child psychiatrists use to talk about a collection of symptoms going on so that we have a way of, as clinicians, talking with one another or talking to your insurance company for reimbursement. But the diagnoses themselves are not really what your doctor is treating, right? They're really treating symptoms. And these symptoms arise because of some difference in wiring in the brain. It's not so much structural, like this part of your structure is bigger than this part. It's has more to do with the connectivity or the wiring between different areas. And what is becoming apparent, and will be probably very apparent once a large project going on called the Connectome Project, which was funded by the Obama administration's BRAIN initiative, is that in looking at many, 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 quote, normal brains, is that people have incredible differences between their brains, even if they have no symptoms of note. So male and female brains can be very different from each other, but even amongst individuals, brains have a lot of difference between each other. So the idea that there is a normal brain and a, quote, abnormal brain is probably not a reasonable way to think of things. But in addition, if you are struggling with symptoms, it's probably going to turn out to be that there is some difference in wiring that is leading to those symptoms, but at the same time, whatever difference in connectivity is there also often comes with a very particular strength. And it may depend on what the symptom is, what the strength is, but what is being missed today, I think, for parents, is that if your child is presenting with something that is a struggle or a difference, or even, let's say, something that you perceive as a quirkiness, most parents feel, first of all, oh my gosh, like this is the end. This is just disastrous. And that's why often the years between presentation of symptoms and actual diagnosis and treatment tends to be minimum of 2 years, and sometimes as long as 5 years, which is a problem because that's enough time for a child to actually become derailed by their symptoms. But the reason isn't because parents don't love their children and want to do the best. It's because it's so painful right now. The idea that there would be this problem that parents can't even allow themselves sometimes to see that. And they say, oh, it's just, it's whatever, being a child, it's being a teenager, and they miss it. And what I want parents to understand is, it's extremely common. Up to 50% of Americans at some point in their life will have a mental health diagnosis. So obviously we're not talking about really weird aberrations. We're talking about something very common. And in addition, if their child does present with a symptom, that what you really want to do is treat that symptom, because you will put them back on their normal developmental track, and you will save them a lot of suffering, because in youth, as I'm sure you've talked about, the brain is very plastic, meaning it's at its most changeable time. It's a time when really new cells are being created and new wiring is being created all the time. And when you intervene with a treatment, you can really make a huge difference to the trajectory of that child and really save them a lot of suffering. But in addition, the difference in their wiring probably means they have a very particular strength, a very particular ability, maybe even the kind of ability that could set them on a path for huge success. I don't mean, just garden variety success, but I mean real ability that may even teeter on the genius. And you want to spend some of the time with your child, not just helping them with what isn't working, but playing to that area and exposing them to that area where they have the strength, so they can hone that and groom that and really use that to their own self-esteem and their own abilities.
I love that. And I want to get into talking about those strengths. But before we do, I just wanted to ask you something that you said, struck me, where you were talking about, that parents sometimes delay getting their child help or getting them diagnosed. Is part of that not just our own looking at our child and trying to say, oh, maybe it's just quirkiness, maybe it's just him. Is it also that other people can react so negatively at times to a diagnosis, and we don't want our child to be looked at in a negative way in the educational system or among friends or family members? Is there something like that going on also?
Well, of course, the answer is yes. In that right now, those judgments and that stigma, it pervades everybody. So, you're feeling that way, and you're going to feel that way whether it's about your own child or potentially somebody else's child. And to some degree, the reason I'm trying to raise this point is that so many of you are quietly, silently judging yourselves, your own child, somebody else's child. If we could come together and acknowledge that the brain is an organ like any other organ, if something is going on with an organ, you would go to the doctor, you would seek treatment. You wouldn't say, wow, you must be morally a bad person right. or a bad parent because your child got diabetes.
Right.
We just wouldn't do it, but we do it about this area. We do. And if we could all be more understanding, educated, and helpful to one another on this score, obviously it would make a big difference. Now, sometimes parents do fear my child will be judged by the teacher or by this other parent, but and I'm not saying that that's not possible, but what I am saying is sometimes when it's very, very loud in your head, that fear, it is yourself, and you are projecting onto others the terror of your own judgment. That you have this feeling like, this means my child will be less than. I'm struggling with the feeling my child will be less than, and I project it onto others that they will feel that way too. We tend to be our own harshest critics, right. And I'm not saying that it's not possible. You will run into judgmental people. You will run into ignorant people. You will run into people who don't understand this material and, will think whatever they think. But I could only say that if it's very intense for you, it may be your own. And sometimes that's hard to differentiate. But it is important to try to do battle with that in the service of your child and yourself, because right. It is very difficult to be with a symptomatic child all the time. It is painful. And you can really, all I can say is for children especially, treatment is useful and makes a huge difference. So you owe it to all of you to dip in.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. And knowing that a child can go to school and be able to focus more or feel less fearful in certain situations if they have anxiety, or be able to deal with friends in a different way because they've been treated or helped in some way, that could change the trajectory of their life.
Yes.
And so getting the treatment is important. I really want to talk about those strengths you talked about, because you mention in your book everything from dyslexia to anxiety to depression to ADHD. I mean, these are really common. And many people tend to exclusively focus on the problems that these disorders create, learning issues, brain differences these create, but this is not what you do in this book. Can you talk a little bit about the strengths that you have found associated with these brain differences? Absolutely.
So, it does depend on what area we're talking about, but, maybe for the purposes of today, I'll talk about common ones for children. Of course, attention deficit disorder is probably that and anxiety are probably the most common for children. Again, diagnostically speaking, you have to reach a certain level of, all kids are, yes, inattentive sometimes, especially when something doesn't interest them. And we have so many distractions for kids today that, that to some degree we're training them to operate in almost in a distracted way with, look at your phone, look at your computer, look at your iPad, look at the video, look at,
you're describing adults too,
Exactly. But what people should understand about ADD is it is not an inability to pay attention. It is an issue with the switch, essentially, the connection in what's called the default network that allows you to decide consciously when you're going to pay attention. So that switch is sort of faulty, and so it's left to, if something is fascinating to the child, and they're getting reward from being engaged with it, then they not only can pay attention, but they can hyper-focus. Kids with ADD particularly can really focus for extended periods of time in depth. And that's why sometimes parents don't realize that what is going on is this attentional issue, because they're like, but my kid, if you give them this, they're like in it forever. But at other times when maybe it's not interesting, but they want to be able to attend because they're in school, they just can't do it. And it's not a matter of willpower or not being lazy. They cannot do it. And there are other things that go along with that. Impulsiveness is a common symptom. And for those that have the hyperactivity component, the ants in the pants need to keep moving kind of activity, losing things a lot, disorganization is a common symptom. So, but the data show that people, children and adults with ADD can exhibit exceptional originality and exceptional creativity. And the reason for that is that in those periods of, let's say, the looser connection that sort of lets you or makes it difficult for you to attend, means that there are lots of periods of time where thoughts are just flowing in almost this, I'll call it messy way, just through the connections, just lots of random thinking, random ideas, daydreaming, etc. And the reality is that daydreaming and messiness of thoughts, if you will, produces a lot of highly original thought, and very creative thought. And the question becomes, can you take those original and creative thoughts and then channel them ultimately into a plan or into an action? And that's where treating people with ADD is important, because you can have all of the cool thoughts in the world if you can't bring any to fruition because you're disorganized and can't concentrate at any time, then you may not produce and use the incredible strength that you have. But a lot of kids with ADD, their impulsiveness does allow them to act on these out of the box thoughts in a way that somebody who is more cautious or more, less risk taking, or less likely to act on something would be. Mm-hmm. So many CEOs of very interesting companies have ADD, and a disproportionate number, because they are these sort of out of the box thinkers who do it. Mm-hmm. They are often high energy, and they have an ability to spot connections and analogies that others often don't. So it is a common thing amongst kids who have ADD to have these disinhibited creative thoughts and see connections between their thoughts, which obviously ultimately can become a plan.
So with anxiety, I mean, I think a lot of people would look at anxiety and say, well, what could possibly be a strength in that area when you're feeling fearful? So can you just tell us a few of those strengths so that we can learn about those?
So it's all a matter, obviously these things are actually a matter of degree. I talk about a concept in the book called the U-shaped curve, meaning that at one top of the U, where someone is very, let's say, ill or, untreated, and having severe symptoms, you are not going to exhibit the most of your strength. And when someone is well, meaning they never had any problem, you also don't exhibit the strength. The people who tend to be the most, let's say, creative, original, talented, whatever the strength is we're talking about, are in that bottom part of the U-shaped curve. They have something going on, but they're not overwhelmed by it. Mm-hmm. And so that is the case very much so for anxiety, which is if you have an overwhelming anxiety disorder, high levels of anxiety can flush out anything you might get out of it, let's say. Mm-hmm. But at lower levels of anxiety, things like an incredible diligence, incredible attention to detail, which obviously, if taken too far, can go to perfectionism, which can really immobilize you. But at that lower level, this hypervigilance to both work, but also to things that are happening socially, relationship-wise. Anxious kids and adults are often incredibly sensitive to others' emotional states and able to read what is going on better than others and make use of that. So they may come across as very empathic and very in tune and very aware and able to sort of prevent, let's say, social disaster before it occurs because they're on it. There's often, and I call that like an emotional vigilance, if you will.
They seem intuitive in that
Absolutely. And an ability to predict outcomes. And again, we could be talking about work issues, we could be talking about social issues, but interestingly, high intelligence has often co-evolved with worry. So, again, if your worry is about everything and anything all day long, not so good. Right. But general worry, which, basically was the original person who said, maybe I won't go hunt for food now because I think I heard some rustling out there in the bushes and it could be a bear, and, was thinking and was using their fine mind to protect themselves. And those are the origins of anxiety. Treatment where you are not, over the top is important, but otherwise gaining of empathy, insight, and as I said, this ability to predict outcomes can be very useful to the anxious person. So you've heard of, of course, we all have heard of performance anxiety. Yes. And how athletes and test takers perform better when they have a certain amount of anxiety than they do if they have none. Yes. So, it is having that, it is sort of titrating the anxiety back enough. So again, I say to you, if you are a parent of a child of quite honestly, the 25 or 1 in 4 children, 25%, 1 in 4 children who will have an anxiety disorder at some point. I urge you to seek treatment for your child, because even short-term treatments can make a huge difference so that they're not overwhelmed. But if they do tend to be on that hypervigilant side, that's okay. Right. You want to help them play to that strength.
So how do parents know when they should seek some evaluation for their child, or when it's just kind of normal social anxiety? So
again, I would say the tipping point is when it really starts to interfere with functioning. Mm-hmm. So, if a child can't finish work because it can't be perfect enough, if a child's grades start to drop because they're very distracted by worried thoughts, if they are unable to go to another child's house, go to a sleepover because they can't be separated, they can't, socially they are so nervous. Mm-hmm. If you hear what ifs when you're with them all the time, what if daddy has a heart attack? What if, even existential things kids will often do in rapid fire if they are having high anxiety disorder time. So what if you die? What if I get hit by a bus? Or, what if the universe blows up? What if, those kinds of things. But it could be just day-to-day mundane things. But that what-ifing all the time is a good clue. Not sometimes. Sometimes is normal. But frequency and functionality are the clues that there's an issue going on.
So, and obviously with ADHD or some of these other ones, it's a similar thought that if somebody is, when you have so much interference with doing your schoolwork or so much interference with how you're relating to others, if you're having trouble with impulsivity, that might be a time. All right, so when we're talking about these amazing strengths, I know what's probably in parents' minds, because I'm sitting here as a parent of a 6 and an 8-year-old. Can you tell us how we as parents can then cultivate some of the strengths you're talking about when they have been diagnosed, or when we know that they are challenged in some of these unique ways?
So often when parents think about it, if they look at this list, they go, oh yeah, I do see that in my child. Right. If they don't, I think it's very reasonable to have neuropsych testing done on your child if they're struggling with the diagnosis, so that you can see on paper the areas that they have particular strengths in. That could be helpful even if you see what's going on with them, but you wonder, is it do you want to help them move in a more verbal direction, in a more math direction? Neuropsych testing can really be helpful in that regard. But exposing them to many things. So talking to them about what interests them, giving them a chance to be exposed to those things. That might be, we go to this museum, we go to this show, you'll try this dance class, what do you feel like drawing? What do you feel like using as a manipulative? Give them a chance. And unfortunately, I think many parents today, forced by our current educational system and getting to college and so on, think they have to help their child create their passion instantly.
Yes, their thing. Get their thing.
So what is the thing that is going to take my child, to this place? You will be a fencer and you will like it. You will fence. But, sometimes you have to give your child some experimentation time, play time, open time to daydream, to think, to try different things out, and to see what lights their fire. Certainly, once you hit upon something that does light your child's fire, give them some room for that. Go talk with their educators about ways that they can either utilize that thing that lights their fire, and or what is visible in neuropsych testing, the method of learning that works for them. So some kids are much more visual learners, and some are much more auditory learners, or some are really going to be amazing with spatial relations abilities, and some are not, and going to be amazing with some other ability. And the point is that being able to communicate with your kid's teacher about, this project is coming up, they've delineated and do it in this way. This is not your child's forte. Could you put your heads together and allow them to do the project in a way that plays to their strengths?
Oh, I love that.
our system is quite rigid now.
Yes.
And I think, we as a nation need to be taking a look at that, because it's really quite nonsensical if you think about how many kids have these different kinds of minds. But as a parent, I think you can get in there and show them the data, as it were. Show them it's not that your child can't do, it's your child can do in these ways. Can they help you? Can your child do an extra project in this regard, or morph this project in this particular way? How can educators partner with you so that your child has a chance to shine, feel good about something, and engage with the things that they are really going to be their strength? I also want to say to parents, we have a tendency when our child has a weakness to drill that weakness into the ground.
Yes, we do.
And
yes.
I really want to say that, and again, in my book, make this clear, talking with all the experts, that's really not the way to go. Mm-hmm. Yes, you want treatment, but you probably want to spend about 20% of the time on the treating, the getting the treatment, and the making, accommodations to help your child to pull up their weakness, as it were. But you want to spend like 80% of your time on the strength. You want to spend more time giving them space in the day, creating space in the day for them to utilize what they can do and what they have affinity for. Because to some degree, what they're really not good at, while you want to help them, you will never be able to build it up to something that is going to be unreal for them, because the brain basically bathes itself in dopamine, the neurotransmitter dopamine, when it likes something, when it feels good, when it's getting reward. That's how people get into trouble with gambling or with drugs, because of dopamine release, and it feels so good, it's hard to stop it. But when your child is engaged in something they really like and feel excited about, which probably many parents are hoping isn't just a video game,
right?
They do get a dopamine release, and that provides the positive reward that makes it easier and more delightful for them to keep rehearsing and keep practicing. Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours. It can't just be 10,000 hours of something you hate.
Right.
And you're not good at. It just actually doesn't work. People tend to spend their 10,000 hours on something that they are engaged with. So that principle of spending more time in the thing you're engaged in, you can build that up, really build that up. And of course if your child has dyslexia, you must spend time helping them develop workarounds so they can operate in a reading world. Of course, if your child has anxiety, high anxiety, you want to spend some time getting treatment for and shoring up their ability to not be mired in the highest levels of anxiety. But you really want to spend time allowing them to get engaged in the things that work for them.
So if your child is struggling in these areas, you just gave us some really lovely scripting of how to talk to a teacher about your child's gifts and differences and how you can put your minds together. But what do you do when your child starts to notice that there are some differences between him or herself and their friends, and they are feeling frustrated by these differences? If the child is sitting in front of you and you know that they have these gifts, but they're seeing their differences as weaknesses, what could you say to your child that would help them to set them on the right path?
Well, I think a lot of what I have been saying, I would be really upfront with your child that, yes, you see that they, let's say it's anxiety, yes, they struggle with anxiety. It is not their fault. It is not anybody's fault. But it is probably a difference in their makeup, that they have a tendency to be more anxious. And that means that attending to whatever it is, we're going to see this therapist, we're going to do these things to help you with that. And it does help. So we can help you to feel better in that regard. But at the same time, and it takes some work. And I would be honest with my child about that. I mean, I think that unfortunately, usually it's sort of like parents try not to name things.
Right.
And they try to say, oh, this will be like fun. It won't be fun. And that's okay. Like, it'll be some hard work. Other kids have other things to contend with that might be hard. Something going on in their family, something going on in their mind. I mean, everybody has their thing to contend with. This might be their thing to contend with. And they will have to put in the work, and you will help them to be able to feel better. And at the same time, there's something strong. They have an ability that you're going to help them root out. And they can really use, and that is something that they're going to play to, and you want to give them the space to figure out how to use that. You're going to try different things. You're going to talk with their teacher about that, and let them see that there is an upside to dealing with this difficulty, not to diminish the downside, because it's real, and it might be something that they even have to, periodically in their lives come back to getting treatment for. But that is the reality.
Yeah, I think that's a great solution, and understanding that everybody's working on something, and that there can be this gift in this issue that they're having. I know in your book you talk about this amazing doctor who was able to see how the diagnoses of Down syndrome in utero because she had dyslexia. I mean, I think can't we use some of those stories to inspire our kids?
That is absolutely why I wrote the book in the way that I did, and I hope parents will take those stories back to their children, depending on what's going on. So yes, I talk about in the anxiety chapter. I talk about David Sedaris and others who have absolutely harnessed their anxiety to use it in the service of being highly successful. You're mentioning Dr. Beryl Benacerraf, who is a discoverer of the method of diagnosing Down syndrome in utero in fetuses, because she could see, because of the unique spatial relations ability that comes along often with dyslexia. She could see things on x-rays and ultrasounds that other people really cannot.
Amazing.
Literally cannot.
Amazing.
And it is amazing, and it is due to this different wiring. And I think that that yes, using stories of people who have struggled with exactly the same thing going on with your child, but have been, wildly successful and able as a result of that, is a very useful model. Children need models, and unfortunately most people who have had issues have hid out because of stigma. And so there haven't been a lot of models to point to and say, but look, they're struggling too, and yet they have this ability, and this could be a role model for you.
It's such a good point. So at this point, let's do the top tip. What would you want parents to know if you could give them one tip or piece of advice to take away from this podcast?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I could do. I mean, I would say the important things are recognizing symptoms that are causing a problem and addressing with treatment, but recognizing and helping your child find their particular strengths and giving them space to develop those strengths. Those would be obviously, those are because, kids need to develop workarounds that's what I mean, the name I would use to deal with difficulties. And by the way, we all, even if they don't fall in one of these categories, we all have something that's a relative weakness, and we all should be looking for the ways that we manage around those and coping skills, a toolbox of coping skills to manage them. But in this case, there's the real potential for unique strength and ability, and I hope that parents will help their child look for that and develop those.
Let's give everybody the resource of the week. How can people find out more about you, your book? What would you like them to look up when they get off this podcast?
Well, certainly the book is available, The Power of Different, The Link Between Disorder and Genius. It's, wherever, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much wherever books are sold. But my website is www.drgailsaltz.com. That's DRGAILSALTZ.com. And if they have a question, they can certainly tweet me at Dr. Gail Saltz.
It's perfect. And I know that people will be extremely excited about what you've done. So many people concentrate on the problems and the issues that arise because of a diagnosis. And I think that you're really helping a lot of people by telling them there's strengths here. Yes, we need to deal with the diagnoses and help our children, but there are strengths that we need to uncover. And these people may be the geniuses of the world that make a huge impact on the next decades of our lives.
Listen, if you look back at the Van Goghs, the Hemingways, the Lincolns, the, Einsteins, if you look back at the most iconic people you can think of, they really all had a mental health issue or a learning disability. And I think it's important for us to keep that in mind when we think of who the geniuses of our future will be.
Absolutely. Keep them in mind and make sure we tell our kids all about them.
Absolutely.
Dr. Gail, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about the power of different, the link between disorder and genius. You have provided really important information. I think that parents really can get frustrated and stressed out about all the negatives that they're hearing. Thank you for putting a positive spin on this as well. I like what you said about everybody having their thing to work on, but providing these kids with the space to help them develop their strengths. I'm all about strengths, and I really, it just resonates with me, everything you've said. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've got my takeaways, and sweet friends, I hope you have yours. Let's discuss them. Come up onto Facebook and go to facebook.com/Dr. Robyn Silverman, or let's chat about it at drrobynsilverman.com or twitter.com/Dr. Robyn, and you can tweet Gail too. Oh, and if you love this podcast like I did, would you kindly go up to iTunes and rate it and review it so others can also learn all about it? I'd truly appreciate it. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to How to Talk to Kids About Anything. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com. I look forward to weathering the storms and enjoying the sunny side of life together. And please remember, even when it seems like nothing is going right, and we all have those days, you've got this. You're here, you're getting the information you need, you've got these amazing experts that are telling you some great things you can do. And on the days that we fall short, and we all have them, never forget there's always tomorrow. Parenting is the ultimate do-over. I get it, and as there are moments when we doubt our know-how, our choices, and our sweet, sweet sanity, please know that you are 10 times the parent you think you are. Until next time, this is Dr. Robyn Silverman with How to Talk to Kids About Anything. Please tune in again and keep connecting through conversation. See you next week.
You've been listening to How to Talk to Kids About Anything with Dr. Robyn Silverman. For more information on books, articles, speaking engagements, or curriculum, please visit drrobynsilverman.com.